First of all, welcome to Beyond the Text, long awaited, with me, Samuel Woodall.
And me, Jack Thompson.
In person. Perfect timing. Beautiful,
Finally.
I like it.
It's been about a year.
It has. And we're going to get straight back into it with Thomas Augustine and the City of God.
Thomas Augustine.
St. Augustine of Hippo, not Thomas Aquinas.
They're quite different, you know.
Anyway, please, Jack, how have you been?
Oh, I've been very well, yes.
Mm.
We've just come back from a wonderful little retreat in Buckingham,
We certainly
which has been delightful, and attending an intellectual history conference.
Which has been super.
Yes.
Who was a standout presentation, would you say?
Well, I was very interested in. Oh yeah. I'm supposed to say it was Sam's presentation. That was the standout, and indeed, judging by the responses from the people, it was.
Well, it's very kind.
But I was also, just because of my
No, you can leave it there.
difference of discipline, let's say, I was most interested in the guy who came from the literary
background.
background. That was most my subject area, really. And he had a whole pedagogy which he derived from Milton. He applied it to the paradigm philosophy, which was fascinating.
No, I thought he was very interesting and a very pleasant man. We got to see him on the bus on the way back to London this morning.
But not the train.
Not the train, unfortunately.
So,
he was lost.
Yes.
In paradise of Milton Keynes.
Oh, indeed.
But today we're going to be discussing Augustine of Hippo, who was born in 413, around the time of the sack of Rome.
He was not born in 413.
He wrote...
Yes, he wrote the
City
of God
in
in 413.
413.
Yeah.
But Jack's going to introduce him anyway.
Yeah.
I just wanted to warm you up and tease Jack with wrong dates.
I actually don't have the dates for Augustine's birth.
So he could have been born in 413 and started writing straight away.
I think if I were to give a rough guess, I mean, he wrote so he had his conversion in 391. That was in the garden in Milan, and I think he was about 30 when that happened. So work it back, he was probably born 370. I want to say 373. That rings a bell.
373.
Yeah,
Final answer.
That's my final
You're
answer.
wrong. It was the 13th of November, 354 AD.
Oh wow! So he was like in his late 30s.
Yeah.
Conversion. Okay. Well, very good. For whatever reason, I never put it in the original slide. Anyway, but I had all the other dates. Augustine. So he's born in North Africa. I think modern day Albania. Not Algeria. Algeria.
It's going well so far. Please don't tune out.
And his father. I think they have quite a difficult relationship. His father's not particularly religious. His mother is very pious, and his mother spends her life trying to get her son back to the faith. She does eventually, and not directly, but through her prayers, really. And it's something Augustine comes to recognise in the Confessions, the central role his mother played in bringing him back to the Catholic faith. Augustine's sort of cultural and intellectual heritage was actually Manichaeanism, which was a sort of a theosophic sect, very vaguely connected to Christian doctrine, which had many elements of mythology attached to it, and which didn't really recognise such a thing as a material substance. And so Augustine's conversion story, which he writes about in the Confessions after his conversion, and I think also once he's bishop, he writes the Confessions.
This is all sort of the time of Donatism, isn't it?
Yes, exactly.
And his father was a pagan and converted on his deathbed.
I'm not aware of that.
I read it at the Bodleian.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear. That's good news. So you have many heresies proliferating at this time. I mentioned Manichaeism, Donatism, and Pelagianism. Pelagianism is the view that you don't need grace for salvation. It's something that we can attain out of our own free will and effort. Donatism is the view. Donatism involves many things. I think it rejects the necessity of baptism. It tends to have a very social view of the church as an institution which has communal function but lacks transcendental validity. That's my understanding of Donatism. Excuse me. And so Augustine's intellectual trajectory, and so Manichaeism. He studies the Latins and the Greeks. He resonates quite a lot with Cicero. Really, the only Greek author he resonates with. He struggled a lot with Greek actually, which is good to know because Augustine's so intelligent.
Yeah.
He also struggled with Greek. He's more inclined to the Latin authors. He's well versed in Roman history, as we see in the City of God. In the Confession, he goes through a series of intellectual realizations, which particularly come from meeting Ambrose of Milan, who
is this the Ambrose?
Yes, Saint Ambrose.
Yeah.
Yes, who was the bishop, and he's also the author of what became the Western liturgy, more or less. There were multiple different liturgical forms, so Ambrose is quite important. Ambrose challenges him on his reading of scripture in many places, and eventually gets Augustine to realise that there's some sense to this notion of immaterial substance, but for Augustine that comes through his study of Plato first and foremost. Not Plato directly, but Plotinus, the Platonist. Of antiquity.
So passing through.
Yes. That takes him so far, but then he has to reckon with his defective will. So on the Platonist view, he still thinks that the soul is pure and the body is where the sin is. But he can't then come to terms with why he can't will for himself to will the good.
Yeah.
Something St. Paul puzzles over in the letter to the Romans. And this is the catalyst for Augustine's conversion. He had a breakdown in the garden in Milan with his friend nearby.
And he's, at this point, a professor.
Yes, he's quite a renowned teacher. He's well respected. He's a great orator, a great writer, and very learned. And he'd been employed in tutoring all his life, basically since he graduated from Carthage, in different places. And that's why he moved to Milan to teach
rhetoric.
Yes.
And the bishopric of Milan is one of the most influential sees.
Yes.
At this time
yes,
as well.
Indeed.
And that's why Ambrose is there.
Yes. Ambrose is one of the
bishop.
Is one of the forefront churchmen of his day in sort of going up against the state.
Yeah.
Not just going up against, but having to negotiate a relationship with the state, a working relationship.
Ambrose giving sermons, I see, at the Basilica of St. Ambrosia.
Yes, it's known as that now. It wouldn't have been known as that in his life.
I also saw that Ambrose is obviously an influence on Augustine, but actually in North Africa, preceding Augustine, that there is quite a network of Christian scholarship itself, with Tertullian.
Tertullian was one of the Roman emperors.
Yeah, and his writings on a combination of things which seem very North African by comparison to perhaps traditional Christian teaching around sort of prayer and fasting and these sort of things. He's based out of Tunisia, it seems. So that had an impact on Augustine. Is there anything sort of about Tertullian that we should know?
Tertullian is an interesting figure because he's the first Christian emperor, nominally speaking. So he comes around, I think, in the mid-3rd century, and immediately following the persecution of Diocletian, which was the last major persecution of the Christians in Rome. Maybe there was. I don't think there was subsequent persecution, certainly not on that level. It's so interesting that you can have a figure like Diocletian and then immediately after you can have Tertullian, who is openly Christian, not necessarily in the strict sense, but he certainly aligns himself with the Christians, and he writes tracts to address to the senators where he basically says we are all Christians, and he the sense in which he means that is disputed. But I don't think it's unreasonable to suggest that he allying himself more or less with the church. In opposition to the state. in light of the persecutions, and he basically is observing in this letter how the secular state is the minority position.
Perfect. Now we have a state. We have a vast state at this time. Obviously, we've been saying that Augustine is in Milan in the 380s. This is now only 30 years prior to Rome at its greatest falling to Northern raiders. Obviously, Augustine is on the periphery as much as he's immersing himself in the Roman Empire as a whole by going to Milan, etc., and moving from the periphery to the centre. But how much do you think his geography impacts the way he looks on the world? And this is something, obviously, when we delve more into the text, we can discuss further. But how much do you think that kind of peripheral Berber-Roman situation that he was born into affects his outlook on Rome?
That's interesting, because he clearly, in one respect, he's an outsider. He's very far removed from the action.
And there's another Algerian who writes about outsiders much later on. Yeah, also Algerian.
Yes.
But with a very different empire to France.
Empire. But so it gives him, I think, the necessary critical distance from the events. On the one hand, he still receives a Roman education. Yeah. And he's still culturally Roman. But then also, it gives him this other perspective on it. I mean, maybe one of the most special things about Augustine is how many different phases there are to his intellectual life, beginning from his youth, and how that uniquely situates him from the church's perspective, to be a formidable defender of the faith from all kind of contrary positions and heresies, which maybe being in Rome at this time you wouldn't have had that opportunity, because you wouldn't be so familiar with these heresies, the Donatists, the Manichaeans. I think this is quite particular to North Africa. That this is proliferating. It's almost associated with a kind of church that grows there, a kind of church community. It's not purely intellectual.
So we've got an idea of his geography, we've got an idea of his formation. Let's return now to the idea of this moment in the garden that you were discussing, because I think that's critical, and then we can move on to the text.
It's a fascinating moment, because he discovers for himself that what you might call the soul is as implicit in sin as is the body. And the pagan view, and also the philosophical Greek view, is that matter suffers the effect of moral evil and natural evil, but the soul somehow doesn't. Or if it does, it's a consequence of what happened to the body. So the body is sort of the primary locus of sin. I mean, you start to get contrary perspectives on this in Aristotle, say, or even in Plato, where virtue is considered something that one chooses. And this is already starting to approximate much more what Augustine discovers, but it's not really fully worked out into an anthropology. Not in Plato, because the body is radically secondary. For the Christian, the body is bound up with the meaning of the human person as much as the soul. Of course, the soul is the life principle, but the body is also a part of this. And so it's very important for Augustine to have this discovery that the will is corrupt. Not thoroughly corrupt, but one cannot will oneself to will the good in all cases. Aristotle doesn't quite have this understanding in the same degree. He does understand that bad habit accumulates and undermines the will, but he doesn't have... So theoretically speaking, if one just has the good habits, one will be fine. But that's not what you actually see in the world. You see people who have everything together on the surface, and then one day everything collapses. For them. You see that but also conversely, you see that addicts recover, but addicts are trapped in a cycle of bad habit. So there are all these questions about will and how effective it is, and the Christians summarise this mystery in the doctrine of original sin.
Yeah.
And this is what Augustine discovers. He struggled with lust, particularly lust and vanity, all his life, but especially lust. And he can't escape this desire.
Yeah. And obviously, there's a massive parallel here: a garden, lust, vanity.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a certain thing.
It's quite providential, and he has a breakdown and he surrenders to trying to discover something new, basically, and he receives the revelation. He's directed basically to a verse in Scripture in one of the letters of St. Paul, Ephesians, I think. Put on the armour of Jesus Christ, and his friend is in the garden. He receives a complementary verse. Anyway, Augustine's received into the church, baptised by Ambrose, and 5 years later is made bishop. It's quite fast paced. But the core lesson from the garden is this one of that the Platonists solved everything for him except the problem of sin, the problem of evil, and the only solution to Augustine, for Augustine, as he later elaborates, with a personal relationship to Jesus Christ.
And this is what Charles Taylor says in his Sources of the Self about interiorization of the moral life, development of inwardness. This is a turning point in thinking.
Yes. A radical interiority, which isn't self-sufficient or contemplative, purely contemplative, because the Greeks already have that.
Yeah.
The Greeks have the rational inner life. What's new is that finds its fulfillment in another. This will be how Augustine responds to Cicero. So Cicero had a concept of justice, which is communal and binding, but until we really learn the meaning of self-giving and service, we won't really have this sense of justice, and Augustine locates that in Jesus and his teachings specifically. Because he associates it with this revelation.
And all of the revelation, to point out as well, is laid out in Augustine's Confessions, which are seen as, we've discussed this before, and you heard it at the Pascal Institute as well, in terms of the first ever form of autobiography, and something that will be emulated by Descartes in his Confessions, and ultimately Rousseau, who goes through a similar sort of moment of crisis in his Confessions, very similar to Augustine. Doesn't lead him towards God, but it leads him towards his kind of ethical framework that he develops during the Enlightenment.
It's worth noting a line from Ernst Cassirer, who has a lot to say about Augustine in his book, The Myth of the State. He says that Augustine, he makes his personal conversion the centre of the whole intellectual world, particularly the emphasis on will, which we see in the City of God coming up a lot. Someone who suffers is not... The suffering you experience doesn't have any intrinsic relationship to your moral state. If you're suffering, that doesn't automatically mean you're a bad person. Suffering is just an opportunity for sanctification for Augustine. So when you see a nation fall, is it because the nation's evil? It's like, well, maybe, but also maybe not. Or if you see someone suffering... you have to deal with the barbarians who are going and raping Christians. And the pagans say, well, doesn't that mean that they're evil? And Augustine says, no, because they're not suffering these things because of what they've willed for themselves.
No. Eric Voegelin, in Order and History, sees Augustine as a crucial figure in what he calls resisting the immanentization of the eschaton, the Last Judgment. Would you say that sort of aligns in that sense, that Augustine is resisting the idea that sort of there is a salvation, as you're saying, through kind of political action, through that sort of very imminent judgment?
Not necessarily. So we have a debate on to what extent the City of Man is functional in the order of salvation. Maybe we're getting a bit ahead, but Augustine writes a book about contrasting the two cities, the City of God, the City of Man. He writes it after the fall of Rome, and he has to write it in defence of the Christian cultural and intellectual influence on Roman society and the loss of pagan customs. He argued that that's not at all responsible for the fall of Rome.
Yeah.
But rather Rome's own concupiscence.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know, and a common reading of this text is that Augustine's quite pessimistic about the city of man because of original sin and all of these things that ultimately society is a failed product. But I don't really see that being asserted absolutely, because he had many positive things to say about Romans at particular points in history, but also many criticisms.
And he's trained in their ways. Much of what
exactly.
he is doing is a Roman legacy. I had a historian who said just this before we move on to the work. Let me find it. I think it might be related to Peter Brown, actually, who I think we've discussed before.
Yes.
Situating Augustine within late antique culture, not medieval theology. Yes, with Augustine being a product of Roman education and rhetoric and his deep immersion in classical moral psychology. This is in the big sort of cornerstone tome, which I'm sure you've delved into, Jack, yourself, Augustine of Hippo, 1967. And Brown is essentially providing an important corrective that Augustine is not anti-Roman in a crude sense. He is reworking Roman moral language under Christian assumptions. So the City of God that we're going to move on to is a conversation with Roman elites, not a rejection in its entirety per se of classical civilization.
Yeah, I think that's very important. I mean, he doesn't abandon Cicero's definition of justice; he completes it. Yeah. He doesn't criticise all the Roman virtues; he puts them in their right place. Now, you asked specifically about sort of imminent action and that's related to salvation. I mean, if you study the basic ethical doctrine that's being put forward, that temporal suffering is a means to salvation rather than a judgment on God's behalf. Yeah. A prior judgment. I think that's quite important because it basically means that in the midst of the world, in your present circumstances, you find the means for salvation in what you suffer, in the challenges you're called to face, in your vocation, your professional vocation, spiritual vocation. So I've always been very aware of this because the purpose of the individual soul is to discover the ways in which God is providing for that in the here and now. Yeah. So the state, the politics, all of these things are bound up with that. But it requires the right set of virtues to engage with it productively. You need prudence. You need courage. I mean, Ambrose is a great example. Obviously, a positive influence on Augustine. Ambrose is very involved in the politics. He's constantly speaking to the senators and the emperor, trying to negotiate the church's standing in Roman society as emperors come and go who are more or less favourable to the church, right? So, there's definitely a place for a Christian to engage with the city of man, and so.
Yeah, no, I think Vogelin's point is made during a period he's writing during a period in the Cold War where obviously politics is being used like a godhead in the Soviet Union to justify action and to justify sort of virtuous action in the Soviet Union, that there's some ideal. And I think he's trying to suggest that what Augustine was doing was saying, actually, no, there is nothing in politics that can, that can reveal virtue in and of itself, that you have to turn inward to be able to do that. You can't just have these grand ideas that somehow, if you do this politics correctly, you become virtuous. It starts with the individual self looking inward.
Yeah, there needs to be reflection. I mean, Plato already understood this. This is also one of Ernst Cassirer's points, that Plato himself had figured that the inward retreat wasn't enough, and it's implied in the dialogues that this is sort of the position the real Socrates came to. Yeah. But what Plato is advancing upon is that then the products of that introspection then need to be tested in the world. Yeah. And that's why Plato's philosophy more or less culminates in the project of trying to found an ideal state.
So we have Augustine. Let's look at his project, the City of God. It's not an apology for Christianity alone. It's a reconstruction of Roman history, morality, and political meaning. You could say it's one of the first attempts to write a philosophy of history. So let's turn to book 2 that we looked at, Roman customs, vice, moral formation. Augustine discusses Roman traditions, their social function, gladiatorial games, theatres and public festivals. What do these serve as? What do they do? And where would you like to take this, Jay?
Oh, well, there's so much to say. I mean, Augustine has a lot to say. But he talks about these things in the Confessions as well. In the Confession, already in the second or third book, he raises the question why people feel the need to go to the theatre and make themselves cry.
Yeah.
He finds this very strange. But he had a very critical relationship to culture, distinct from politics, let's say. Culture and popular custom. He tends to think that it promotes vice, and I mean, you can make a political case for it. I mean, we know how much these things were used to distract the population from something that were going on. I mean, Nero was very big on the bread circuses idea, so was Caesar in his own way. Augustine. All of this culminates in a critique of values fundamentally. So you can look at Roman society and you can look at their gods. And not just literally, but also, I mean, there are less obvious ones that go by names that we don't commonly associate with a Roman pantheon, but which were treated as such. I mean, you can look at fate, you can look at victory, you can look at felicity even. And some of these come very close to the Christian God. Others are quite different in very important respects, so there may be occasion to confuse them. So he tries to make these arguments in particularly in books 2 and 3. He deals with this stuff. He also tries to show that the Roman pantheon, in a way, had many contradictions. There are gods in Roman culture who are given very trivial functions and so are hardly at all. There are values which are sometimes higher, sometimes lower, or values which feel that they ought really just to be subsumed under one deity. So it's sort of a critique a very playful critique of the logic of pantheistic thought. Much like what Socrates had already given. But it's always trying to delineate what's accurate and what's not. So felicity comes very close. Felicity gives the good to people. Fate approximates providence but doesn't quite get there because it denies freedom, and freedom very important for Augustine, because the doctrine of the will, pretty primary. In terms of Roman politics, he realizes how much imperial virtues have driven the state, particularly in late in history, and have become its reason to be, raison d'etre. He's very critical of that. He thinks that once you get a state whose only means of survival is just to conquer other states, he thinks this is just utter folly. So he had a lot to say about all these things.
So essentially he's saying that Rome's traditions have trained desire badly.
Yes.
Customs have habituated citizens into certain loves, where public vice becomes private character. So the interior is being affected by the exterior. Augustine maybe isn't saying that Rome declined because it stopped worshipping, but he's arguing that it never possessed the virtue in the first place that it claimed that it did, essentially.
Yes. So even in Cicero, there's a question of has the Republic ever existed? Has there ever been an instance where Rome agreed on what justice was and that was protected? Arguably there was, but it would probably be very brief. It would maybe a generation or two, much like democratic Athens. Short-lived. I mean, Augustine going even a step further than this, and for Augustine it never existed. Precisely because justice was never fully understood, never fully grasped.
And what about tradition and morality? How do these things affect Augustine's thinking when he looks at Rome? You know, it seems that Augustine, he comes across this sort of Roman term, mos maiorum, the customs of the ancestors, long seen as the backbone of Roman virtue, revered continuity with the Republic even. How's he tackling these kind of concepts?
Well, he's just looking at their objects. So I mean, there were customs which involve clear vices, and he just calls them out for that.
Yeah.
There were many. I mean, for a modern reader, you can find criticisms of things that look like misogyny. You can find criticisms of bloodlust. You know, so he's again, much like Plato. He just doesn't think that traditions in and of themselves are good, but what is their object? What are they promoting? Are they promoting virtue or vice?
And actually, strangely, for our heritage series here, it actually feels in a way like he's saying longevity doesn't equal legitimacy.
Not at all.
He's saying that customs can be corrupt, they can be ancient, they can be archaic.
Yeah, an interesting dimension to Augustine critique, and why it really ought to be taken seriously, because some people would not really engage with Augustine because they're immediately put off by the Christian prejudice. Or the perceived Christian prejudice. But Augustine's really clever, because throughout the book he cites primarily Roman sources. He doesn't really cite any Christian sources, because there's not really many to cite. But if he's the first, really, that's widely available, really. So he knows the Roman historians and what they thought. He knows the Roman politicians and what they thought, and he's constantly observing with citations, sort of quotations from Sallust and Cicero and many others, and Tertullian also, that the politicians themselves have always known that these customs are bad, but they have political expediency.
Yes.
This is very clear from reading the Roman literature. So he's really just holding up a mirror to Rome. That's the real art.
That's a nice phrase. Where did you get that from?
I don't know. did you say
it? When we were discussing authoritarian governments on the continent and rapans holding up a mirror.
Oh, there you go.
You see, our influence rubs off on one another. But no, exactly. I mean, at best, the Roman politicians are nostalgic conservatives. At the worst, they actively, as you're saying, know that some of these things are vice-filled, sinful. And Augustine's mission is to essentially destabilise nostalgia, which again sort of flies in the face of this idea of heritage. But as various thinkers that we've looked at and will continue to look at in this series they don't obediently abide by the kind of slow building up of the brick wall. If there's a rotten brick in the brick wall, as we've said before, or a broken brick, you don't knock the whole wall down, you take it out. And this is what Augustine is doing, or suggesting to do.
No, exactly. And in that he's very Roman, because I think the Romans were, on the whole, very pragmatic people. I don't see Cicero even as the emblem of conservative Republican Rome. He's not a traditionalist. In the sense we would think of it today. He's not a nostalgic character. His questions are about not about custom, but about virtues. And indeed, there are specific customs that work to uphold that, but they tend to be not just customs, but institutions that have grown around customs. So there is an importance to the triumvirate as a distinct body. You need to keep that. There is a importance to they have like a religious branch of the government as well, where they have a kind of priesthood and offering. I forget the name for the auspices. That has a certain importance to Cicero as well, and to Roman tradition. That's about it.
Should we turn to book 14?
Book 14.
The highest good and political limits.
Oh, that's an interesting one, yeah.
So, as far as I can tell, Augustine sees these sort of competing ancient views. You have the Stoics, the highest good being tranquility through reason. You have the Epicureans, highest good being pleasure, understood as an absence of pain. And the Roman civic ideal of glory, honour, domination, imperium. So what are Augustine's responses, Jack?
Yeah, well, it's quite a lengthy, I think from memory, it's quite a lengthy chapter. He gives you a very detailed survey of the different concepts of the good. I mean, you could take each of them in turn, but ultimately Augustine tries to uphold a Christian concept of the good, which consists in the soul finding its highest good, which is communion with the living God. So it's certainly not to be found in pleasure, strictly speaking, as the Epicureans hold.
Yeah.
Because, well, pleasures can lead to vice. I mean, pleasures are not bad in themselves, but they are rarely conducive to good habit. They have the character more of temptation than of things that you can possess in and of themselves. I mean, there's also an element of the highest good being found outside of this world.
Yeah.
In a way, it's immanent to this world because it's characterized as an ethic, which is a response to what you experience and especially what you suffer. But it's fully realized in a life beyond this world, and it makes sense. It's the context, the ethical, moral context in which life and death become coherent. Or conscience and death. So there is a conscience. There is the certainty of death. We don't seem to get away with things. Or if we do, there's a question of cosmic justice that's raised. The possibility of eternal moral truth, and therefore the possibility of justice. So all these things find their resolution in something outside of this world, and outside of politics. So it's a religious question, not a political question. It's not solved by consumption. It's not solved by conquest. But the resignation of these things, and ultimately that's characterized by obedience to the will of God, which is a very mysterious phenomenon, because it's not like it had a general form, but then what that looks like for individuals can vary quite widely. I mean, it's to do with questions of vocation. If you survey the history of saints, I mean, they all live such different lives. So there's no one concept of the good in Christianity except that it's united by love and obedience and charity. Core virtues, but which have such varied expressions in proportion to the very opportunities in which the love of God can be made manifest in the world. This is what Augustine tried to indicate, essentially.
And I think, I guess, when it comes to his sort of response to the political order of the day, I mean, this comes back to some of these things we were discussing last night about harmony and these kind of things, and he sees that states desire peace, maybe, rather than harmony, as a term. But even unjust societies can desire peace, because it gives an easier life to the rulers, obviously. But peace without justice is fragile. And that Rome was not a true republic because it didn't have justice.
Yes.
Now, what is perfect justice? I think we've discussed this at length before in terms of Augustine's influence on politicians, and we've referenced Margaret Thatcher. But also, I can see that one suggestion is that Barack Obama had actually cited Augustine along with an influence on Obama, which was Niebuhr. Do you know Niebuhr? 20th century Democratic scholar Reinhold Niebuhr.
I think I've seen his name written somewhere. I've never read him.
and he reintroduced Augustinian arguments into 20th century politics with a sort of Christian realism that humans are morally capable but politically dangerous, and that power must be checked because of sin. Now, Obama basically took this and suggested that there is an impossibility of perfect justice, that as much as we can try and intervene in the world and resolve crises and problems and desire peace, harmony, etc., you can't do it in a political state. It's just not possible. It's an ideal, but outside, and this is a heavy sort of Augustinian political realism impacting Obama's thought there. And we've said similar things about Thatcher, that obviously she has cited Augustine in speeches in the past, particularly to do with sort of the responsibilities of charity rather than, say, the state, that, you know, if you have two coats, give one away. It's kind of this idea that it's not so much the state's responsibility, it's the individual's responsibility. Again, this kind of inwardness that she felt in a political sense as well as in a religious sense. But returning to Augustine himself, another question that I think you'd raised previously, Jack, is history rational for Augustine?
Oh, that's a very good question.
Well, you came up with it. So it would be.
I don't remember coming up with it. I kind of do, yeah. Well, kind of the question that, it's a popular question today because of the conservatives. I find this very strange. The American conservatives critique Marx for thinking that history is rational. I find that very strange.
You do?
Well, yeah, because I think Augustine thinks it's rational.
You do?
Yeah. Absolutely, I think that's a quintessentially Christian notion, that there is coherence.
Yeah.
You know, the world isn't incoherent.
Yeah.
There is a human story, but it's understood in light of Christ.
Is the difference that Marx has this kind of dialectical understanding?
Sure, I mean that would be a much more
rather
accurate
than
criticism, but
Augustine, I guess, sees a trajectory rather than a
well, in a way,
process.
Marx does as well.
But through cycles.
He tries to make it a lot more rational and abstract than what Augustine would accept. And for Augustine, the rationality of history is exactly the same mystery as the person of God and his interaction with the world. So we give it the name providence, which is basically the question of how is it that that God's actions and interaction with persons, primarily, sum to the net good, at least in principle, to the possibility of the salvation of all. That's the idea. That the salvation of all is in principle provided for.
And providence, I guess, is coming up contextually because of the sack of Rome. God governs history without removing free will, without guaranteeing political success. So events like Rome's sack, Christian persecution, imperial collapse, these events reveal to Augustine this reality.
Indeed.
Now that we can see that providence for Augustine is intelligible within a moral framework, but not always morally transparent.
No, indeed. I mean, I think there are several mysteries. I won't say contradictions. I think he's onto something, but it's just really hard. And I think he would himself accept that this is a very hard set of ideas to show their relationship to one another. So on the one hand, you have the idea of we talk about temporal suffering as something that can be sanctified and is in principle not indicative of your moral state, what you suffer. And yet there's also this question of the judgment of nations and the judgment of individuals. And so in some contexts, it seems more appropriate to say actually what people are suffering can be seen in light of evils that have been committed, if not by them, certainly by others. I mean, you can see like how a famine might be engineered. I mean, it's a clear case of suffering due to moral evil, not on the part of the victim, but on the part of institutions. And then you may see that how that unravels politically, because then there are uprisings and then because of mass discontent. And then states fall. And then you say, there's clearly a connection here. That in effect, moral evil is unsustainable. That would be the case. And there's something about this which had a certain divine quality. Now, I don't think you will necessarily find in Augustine a thorough treatment of providence that makes it compelling to modern readers. I think someone like Joseph de Maistre, who will feature in the next podcast,
Very good.
I think he actually gets at this just a little bit more sharply than Augustine. It's interesting to note.
Well,
but I mean, I think the metaphysics is there. It just needs to be elucidated further. I mean, it's so hard to do justice to with such a complex survey of history.
Yeah. I think to bring this then, because you were nicely moving towards the next episode, to return to the concept of this series, heritage, how much authority does it have? Because Augustine does not reject inheritance or memory, but heritage must be morally interpreted. History is not self-vindicating. What are the sort of lasting implications of this, do you think, in terms of contributing to our series on heritage?
Yes, in a way. I mean, Augustine doesn't quite differ from many of the other thinkers we study. I mean, I think there is broad agreement that from all kinds of philosophical and political angles that heritage is something which we ought to have a very critical relationship towards.
Yes.
But Augustine is quite special in, I guess, really where he sees the justification for whatever tradition we do have.
Yeah.
He's a very orthodox Christian.
Yes.
The good, the true, the beautiful, these have very concrete personal meanings for Augustine, and I think that more determinate sense which he can give to say justice and the idea of the state makes him probably more, if you were to try to implement an Augustinian state, probably less liable to certain political dangers like tyranny and
because
use of powers and so forth. Because it seems so easy to pass off certain things as emblematic of an abstract good.
Yeah, and
the moment you locate it in a person, maybe it's different.
And almost an over-reliance on history, on memory, on heritage sanctifies history to a degree which he is saying you can't do. And this is very in vogue in my field of study, intellectual history, the idea that you kind of sanctify a canon and say that it's all been leading up to this point, and that's when tyranny rises. That's when the Soviet Union says, well, this is our moment, or the Nazis in Germany say this is our moment. That's when history is sanctified to that level, and actually Augustine offers quite a strong safety net for this. He has an anti-utopian realism. He puts moral limits on power. There's justification of order without sanctifying the state. And there's a language of tragedy, compromise and responsibility, which, as I mentioned, with modern political figures can actually fit quite nicely and often vindicate their more perhaps pragmatic approaches in politics. But I really would like to thank you, Jack. That was a fantastic walkthrough of Augustine, and we look forward to seeing you next time to look at Joseph de Maistre. Wonderful. Thank you, Jack.